Hey gang, we are in Montana right now at a very special place, hallowed ground. This is where Custer and his men met their end at the Custer Monument and here at the cemetery where many veterans are buried. And you can just look out. Here, we're just south of Crow Agency, the little town. This is Crow territory. And that'll give you a feel of where this all happened. But that was 1876. And I'm going to take you back to 1866. Yeah, we're going to go back 10 years before that to another fight that happened south of here in Wyoming. This was all Dakota territory at the time. And in Wyoming, about an hour's drive south of here, we're going to go to a place called Fort Phil Kearny. And there was a similar battle, the first disaster, massacre. And that's what we're actually going to be focusing on today. Now, there's someone buried here from that battle that has a remarkable story. It's not the leader, it's not the hero. It's just a man from Germany. His name was Adolf Metzger. He was the bugler for a company of men that were under a man named Captain Fetterman. Now, Adolf Metzger was born, around 1834. No one's sure of his exact birth date. He had come to the United States as a young man, settled in Philadelphia, and it is there where he worked as a laborer. On May 29th, 1855, he was enlisted into Company C, Regiment of Mounted Rifles by Lieutenant Burns. His enlistment documents describe him as 21 years of age, 5 foot 5 inches tall. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and a dark complexion. Chances are he was not 21. He was probably 17 or 18. After service with that regiment, he was discharged as a private May 29th, 1860. And he didn't like civilian life. He liked being in the Army, so he re-entered a few months later. On November 14th, he was enlisted into Company C, 2nd U.S. Cavalry by a Lieutenant Wilkins. And that's when he became a bugler. Now the buglers, you always think they're just bugling away. It's to intimidate the enemy, but no, these guys, they stayed with the commander, and they would basically, these were commands. The commander would say charge, and the bugler would play the charge, retreat. That was a different bugle. They had to know 80 different commands in bugle, and that's how all the soldiers could hear and take the orders during the battle, during the fray. When everything was in chaos, you could always hear the bugler and know what you're doing. He served through the various campaigns of the Civil War. No major incidents. During a furlough, he was granted. He got married. Married a woman named Frederica Cooper. Took place on August 2nd at the German Evangelical Church, Washington, D.C. She was only about 15 or 16 at the time. And interestingly, he did not inform his parents back in Germany, hey, I got married. Well, they were on the move. The regiment moved west October 1865 out this way. And probably luckily he left Frederica behind, as many did. Some took their wives. They were coming out this way to Fort Phil Kearny. It was going to be a Cush mission. Sherman said, "Come on out, guys. This is just going to be a vacation. Protect the Bozeman Trail. Not much going on out here. Just watch the pioneers. We're going to build 3 forts. The one in the middle you can headquarter at with a guy named Carrington, and life's going to be great." But it wouldn't be. This area we're going to go to about an hour south of here was under constant attack, mainly by the Sioux Nation and all of those that Red Cloud assembled. We're going to talk about Red Cloud and Crazy Horse. And they would come here very much like Custer in a way, I guess. What happened here 10 years later, they would meet their end in a violent way. But this man was remarkable, Adolf Metzger, and here he lies among the other veterans and heroes alike. And there's his stone. Second U.S. Cavalry. He didn't die here. He died down there, and we're going to go there. I leave a coin. A penny is a sign of respect. Of course, nickel, dimes, quarters, they all have the different meanings. The quarter would mean that you served with that person and were with them when they fell. So, all right, guys, so we're going to go from here and we're going to drive south into Wyoming. This was all Dakota territory. Now, of course, it's Wyoming, this Montana. Rest in peace, Adolf Metzger. And let's go. I'm going to go tell you the story, where it happened. Let's go. Okay, we have arrived in Wyoming at the spot. This is the spot where there was a big fight. Now let's go back to 1851, the Laramie Treaty. All of the tribes, all of the Native Americans, everything was in flux, and you know, the white man coming, the buffalo disappearing, and they made this treaty to give everyone some boundaries. Now this was the land of the Crow, and to the east we had the Sioux, the Teton Sioux, the Lakota Dakota nation, under which there were 7 bands: the Minneconjou, the Hunkpapa, the Oglala, the others, and they basically were running out of, I mean, the buffalo were being killed, and they're like, they came this way, and we're not gonna go for these treaties. And anyway, you know, chiefs would sign the treaties, and they couldn't control all of the bands. So anyway, there was a lot of, you know, chiefs could only represent so many. But they came out this way. They subdued the Crow. They pushed the Crow, and they, you know, this was where the buffalo were, and the white man was encroaching. Now, we're talking about the Bozeman Trail here. This is the Bozeman Trail, and as I mentioned, there were 3 forts set up here. Now, just south of this site, that way is Fort Phil Kearny, and south of that was the fort, and up here, C.F. Smith Fort, and they were all 3 built at the same time. Kearny was the kind of the headquarters for Colonel Carrington, who basically came here with 400 troops and 300 civilians or so. And it's funny, it's ironic, because there was the most amazing chief probably at this time was Red Cloud, who had assembled. Usually the warriors, the bands would fight 30 to 40 and they would have their battles, but Red Cloud assembled all the nations, all the tribes for a big uprising. Now, they were in treaty talks here way south, as Carrington was coming through with this armada. They were literally having the talks, and Red Cloud, saw the stripes, and he's like, you're coming here to steal the land, the white man trail. And he basically struck his teepee right there in the middle of the talks with all the other chiefs, and he was the figurehead, and basically left. And on the way out, looked back and said, I am going on the warpath. And one by one, the other chiefs, they followed and they melted away, and he was on the warpath. So this was all brewing. So Carrington comes here and they build these forts. And even the second day of building the initial layout of the fort, they're being attacked, and they were attacked every single day. It was absolutely brutal here, but they built the fort. It was quite a large fort. I'm talking about Kearny here. And then there were bigger skirmishes. Now, let me show you around a little bit here. Let's pan around the area. So what we have here is, to the west, is we have this massive hill, and we're in a valley. Now, that's going to come into play in the story. But to the northwest of here, we have these mountains. Now, they would call this the Pinery, and this is where they would get all their wood. They would send parties of 40 to 60, and the woodcutters would come on wagon train up in those hills, mountains, if you will, where the pines were, and this is where they would get all the wood. And they would be under attack constantly also, and they'd have to be under the guard of the cavalry soldiers, the mounted soldiers, but they would do it. And then 1866, there would be one major assault that would happen up there, and Carrington sent out. Now, the other thing is, Carrington was really hobbled, because they only had, that was not a large force he had here, and he already lost some soldiers, and they needed reinforcements. Well, they finally got reinforcements, and a couple of companies came in, and one of them was Fetterman, Captain Fetterman, and that's, this is who we're going to talk about here. And you can see the monument here, Fetterman's monument. And he was a very brash guy. He served in the Civil War. He did really well in some notable things. Marched with Sherman on the pillage, the Georgia to the coast, and now he was here to the west, and he was going to fight Indians. Now, Carrington was a lawyer. He had no experience fighting Indians. He was kind of a defensive guy, and they were using defensive tactics. And then when Fetterman came with the other guys, they were critical of Carrington. They're like, hey, we've got to go on the attack here, all this brash ego, and we've got our repeating rifles, and we've got our horses, and we can ride through this nation like they're nothing. So basically, the first big engagement they had here, it wasn't right here, but it was on the woodcutting mission. And what the warriors would do is, very cleverly, is they would send decoys, might be 2 or 3, might be 10, get really close and decoy these and try to get them to follow. And then they would have many more warriors in ambush. So that first major engagement, one of the guys, well, they had 2 companies of soldiers, and they did just that. And they lured them. They lured them out, and they killed one of the captains, Lieutenant Horatio S. Bingham. Fetterman was on that one, and Fetterman he was basically surrounded, and he was a goner, and they were all goners, you know. It was like Custer's last stand, and Carrington came to the rescue and bailed him out just in the nick of time. And at the time, all that brash ego seemed to evaporate. And this is coming from Carrington's notes, that he said that Fetterman kind of like learned his lesson. He's like, sir, we've got to really fight with caution, these Indians. It's not like regular fighting. And Carrington was actually complimentary of this brash Fetterman. Well, it was in December when they would send the woodcutting party again back up into the Piney. Now south of here, just south of here, there is and again we're at the massacre scene. I shouldn't say southwest of here is a pilot knob where they would flag, and from the fort they could see that signal, or the flag signaler, and then they would kind of watch over the woodcutter parties, and if they were being attacked, then they would send up a flag, signals back to the fort, and then of course they would send reinforcements out. So anyway, there was a trap being set, okay? And what they didn't know is Red Cloud was waiting in the wings right here, okay? Red Cloud had assembled anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 warriors. And it was all the Sioux, Arapaho. I mean, they had just, and they were hiding. And they were hiding on each side. And they were like down here. We're looking at this big ridge that goes up here. Fetterman, they're all on the other side. And the woodcutters are up there. But what Fetterman did is he kind of came down just behind this ridge, I believe it would be, right on the other side. And he was following a small band and getting distracted, not going to the woodcutters, right in this direction. On the other side of that, he wasn't here yet. And guess who was leading that little group of warriors? Crazy Horse. Heard of Crazy Horse? Yes. Crazy Horse arguably is, well, very famous, one of the most inspirational leaders, warrior leaders. And he was leading this decoy group. He was trying to lure Fetterman into this trap, because again, they're over there and they're coming this way, and down here is just, imagine just 2,000 or 3,000 warriors. And when you look around here, you can see there's a lot of brush, a lot of places to hide. And Fetterman is falling for it. Now Fetterman, it's 81, there's 80 of them. Plus Fetterman, there's 2 civilians, like Rocky Mountain guys, Indian hunters, and they had their new repeating rifles, and they literally said, we want to try these out on the Indians. We'll go with. And they're riding, and they're well armed, a little short on ammunition, and they're following Crazy Horse. They don't know it's Crazy Horse. Now Crazy Horse is somewhat of an enigma. It's just amazing. Now he's from Oglala, Again, a big band of the Sioux, Teton Sioux Nation, and his father, Oglala. His mother was Minneconjou, her name, Rattling Blanket Woman. And she, when he was born, she named him Curly. And that he had, it said that he had curly hair, he had different kind of features, maybe lighter skin, maybe lighter hair. There's different descriptions. There is a sketch that was done by a Mormon missionary, I think it was 1834, and he drew a sketch of Crazy Horse, and his sister testified, Crazy Horse's sister testified that that sketch was accurate. So there's no picture of Crazy Horse, but that sketch is the closest thing that they have. So, I mean, Crazy Horse, he was very quiet, very shy. He'd walk through the village, he wouldn't talk to, very aloof, not unfriendly, but he was kind of the mystery man. But he loved the children. They say he loved the elderly. He would help, and he would help the weak. And he was just an amazing guy. Of course, later he was murdered, Sitting Bull, a different story, but at the time here, he was here, and he was one of the bravest. And by the way, when he was on the battles, he became different. He was joking, he was trying to keep his fellow warriors at ease, and he would just never show fear, and he was just an amazing leader. So anyway, they brought Fetterman to the top of this ridge right here, and over the ridge they came, and over the ridge Fetterman followed. And it was a big trap. This is where it happened, guys. And they were surrounded. Thousands. If you look down here, you can see the brush, the trees, and you can just imagine the warriors. And they were on all sides. They weren't just on one side or the other or a head-on. They cut them off. They surrounded them. And they massacred them. I mean, these guys all did not have a chance. And the way it really went down is that Fetterman, I don't know exactly where they fell, but you can just imagine maybe in some of these locations, this one location, the big group of them were all overwhelmed, and Fetterman and I forget the name of the other, they literally shot each other in the head at the same time, just as they were being overwhelmed. And American Horse said that he killed Fetterman, and he cut his throat, and he did cut his throat, but I think it was after Fetterman had fallen and committed suicide, the joint suicide. Now, there are a set of rocks I see up there, and I don't know if those are the ones, and I'll point the camera, but it is said that a group of them, along with the two civilians, fell at this location where there were rocks like this and crevices they were hiding in. And again, there were carbine bullets, piles of them found, and it is said this is where Adolf Metzger was, the bugler. And what was really, I'm not sure the words to use, I would say noteworthy, is that they did not mutilate Metzger's body. They mutilated all of the other, well, there was one other body they didn't mutilate for another reason, but they mutilated all the bodies in horrible ways. They pulled their eyes out, they cut their hands off, they scalped them, of course. They did all this, brains on rocks, eyeballs on rocks. I mean, that's what they did. But not to Metzger. Why? Well, of course, the survivors grew old. Those warriors, some later became chiefs, and lots of corroborating testimony that Metzger, and typically the buglers were not armed, and he fought with his bugle. They had him pinned down in a crevice in that rock, one of those rocks, and he was just fighting with his bugle. He was just fighting, and I'm sure they were taunting him, and they were jabbing him with their lances and shooting him full of arrows, and he was fighting with that bugle and smashing it. And they respected him for that. Said, this man is brave. We are not going to mutilate him. And it is said that, and this may not be true, that they covered him with a buffalo blanket. So, Adolf Metzger, that's how he met his end here with Fetterman. Now you can see the bugle. It's south of here at a museum. It's all smashed, and I think there's an interesting story that goes with that bugle, that how it was found here. A long time later, it was found by a rancher here on the battlefield, and it was Adolf's bugle. So that's the story of what happened to Adolf, what happened to the Fetterman. 81 men lost their lives here in such a violent way. And the fort, what would happen to the fort? Well, by the way, there was a blizzard the next day. There was a blizzard the next day, and it was like 30 below, and they had to send a guy, a Portuguese. Phillips was the only brave guy. He took Carrington's horse. I mean, they needed help. They were screwed. And there was a blizzard, minus 30 degrees, literally the next day or two later, and they had to send somebody down to get help to Fort Laramie, and they sent this guy, and he made this heroic ride to bring reinforcements. But they would abandon the fort, and like the very next day when they rode out, the victors came and they burned it to the ground. Phil Kearny, gone. Yeah. Some real history here. Well, let's take a look at this monument here and see what it says. We're on the top of a knob here. It's a big shield, bronze. There's a gate. Yeah, let's see if this will. So it said on this field, the 21st day of December, 1866, 3 commissioned officers and 76 privates of the 18th U.S. Infantry and of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry and 4 civilians. 4 civilians. I said 2, it's 4. Under the command of Captain Brevet Lieutenant Colonel William J. Fetterman, were killed by an overwhelming force of Sioux under the command of Red Cloud. There were no survivors. And I understand that in the early 1900s, Colonel Carrington came back here, and they're the ones that dedicated this. Right here. And can you imagine what he felt like as he probably stood here and looked out, and it must have been like a nightmare to look out and say, this is all those memories, all those sufferings, and then the massacre, all the friends and comrades he lost here. And now it's ranch land. Those sounds of cows you hear in the background. But yeah, you can just imagine, you know, this has to be the big ridge here, and you look up there And you just imagine Crazy Horse riding down with the other warriors at full gallop right over that ridgeline. And then the cavalry coming behind with Adolf Metzger blowing his bugle so valiantly. Down they came, here to meet their end. Rest in peace, all you men.